Hi everyone, I'm super excited to host Adam Sheather. I had the opportunity to host him during COVID times, and we talked so many interesting topics for more than 2 hours on my first podcast. And he's doing so many cool stuff. So I had to get him back on the show, and he's managing from automation, beam beats, consultancies, so many topics we could chat about. So thanks a lot for being on the show.
No, thank you for having me, mate. It's good to be back again. Been a while, but yeah, how have you been?
I'm doing great. Uh, I noticed like we could first get some updates after COVID till now. What are some major updates in terms of business, products you have built, and that would be good for the audience to know.
Yeah, sure. Probably last time I think we chatted, we had a probably pretty good technical dive down into some of the BIMBeat stuff. And so BIMBeats is continue to go on. Me and Conrad aren't the best marketers, but we've got a pretty good list of clients that have jumped on board. So it's got a full time dev team, and now we're looking at growing the marketing and the sales side on that, which has been interesting. And then on the consulting side, so we have automation, which is consulting, which is split into two pieces. One is like bit of BIM management to interface setups and sort of the advisory piece, I guess you call it. And then the other side is development piece. So we build tools for other startups, contractors, Autodesk customers, all of that sort of thing across a very wide spectrum of uses. So yeah, keeps things pretty interesting.
Amazing. And Adam, I actually, from recent podcasts, I've been trying to dive more deeper into more case studies of automation and in the AC. So, if you can share a few examples of the automation, be it from Grasshopper, DynamoDB, or software development, like what are uh, some things you did and
Yeah, I can dive into a couple, I guess, without causing too many breaches of
NDA?
NDAs.
Yeah.
The problem when you become a consulting business for any sort of software development is pretty much every single person you work with wants to put an NDA on you, even if the ideas aren't that unique. But probably the two most specific ones is we did a town planning to for someone. Very similar to the city engine in Esri, but to the local code. So that was a complete sort of grasshopper system, but it was more built from a point of view of environmental sustainability and also like a population center. So I don't know if you've seen City Engine, Esri City Engine before,
Yes.
but you can kind of plot roads and stuff. This would allow you to bring the topography and then more go, okay, I need a settlement for 50,000 people in this area and I want to have renewables at this, and it would generate like everything to the town planning codes and then put all the solar panels and everything like that, so you could decide figure out how much solar was the ratio that you needed to achieve those objectives and things like that. So um, with most products, as you start developing them for customers, you know they're really successful because they keep adding more features. So anytime you build a product for a customer, it's a one-off, unless it's something very small. Um, Typically, what you find is engagements like that. You start off with a small piece, then they'll want to iterate and make the product more complicated, add more features, and so you typically find those become a ongoing thing, which is really cool because that's your best measurement that you're getting traction, which is a challenge in business to business versus consumer to business, which has its own challenges. So yeah. Um, and then what's another good? Probably one of the most interesting ones that we did recently. We built a tool, and I quite like this one because it transcends a lot of the silos. So we've built tools for like doing all sorts of analysis. So like security analysis, where it generates like the camera frustrums inside of Revit as 3D and 2D profiles for security systems and things like that. And they solve silo business problems. So what I mean by that is most of these tools is like you have a town planner or you have a Revit technician, and they want to get from A to B a lot faster. So you build some sort of automation that speeds up that. And that's useful and definitely can save a lot of time, but it's quite a small window of opportunity, I guess you'd call it. So a good example of one we did recently was we were working with a mechanical subcontractor. So these guys draft, I guess, from the engineering specs, the mechanical layout. They then send it to another company to fabricate, and then they get it back on site to then do the installation. So what they wanted was a system that allowed their schedule of parts and everything to be extracted out of the models, but then the third party fabricators, because there's more than one, could then talk to their specific APIs that would then connect back to the model so they could extract and track the quantities. So what you could have is like you'd finish a design, the consultant finish design, the fabricators in the shop could extract the data from that design, and then they could update the statuses of that
Mm.
data from their own. But because it's only an API, they some of them are managing it in spreadsheets, some of them are managing it in assemble, this sort of stuff. And the value of that business to business data communication, and this is where areas like Speckle scratch the surface. And there's a lot of other tools like that, which is the opportunities are huge, but it really is a people and organizational legal challenge at that point. So that was one of the ones where we found huge success. That business has, enabled like six or seven other fabricators. They're going really far. They also then grew their own data team out of successes out of that. So you see these huge sort of spinning ROIs when you break beyond these silos with automation, basically.
Oh man, that's a great insight. And sorry,
No, you're right.
yeah,
Go
I
for
thought
it.
you, yeah. And actually, like, I so I'll be super honest. Like, so for my startup 3D Guru, we have a product and we chose to be bootstrap route, and for the cash flow reason, we started consultancy, and that funds
Yep.
the product development. I'm curious, like, how do you manage this multiple initiatives? Do you get enough time to sleep, and like how insights about that decisions?
A few years ago, I did not get very much sleep at all, and sort of tried to run things a lot myself, and that led to just I've always been quite passionate about work, so I don't mind. My brain's always thinking about something. Typically, though, I do find that same issue that you had, where you have a consultancy, you have a product, and unless you're getting a lot of VC money, or your approach is just to constantly grow through investment until you IPO, or get bought out or whatever, you really need to have this sustainable income
Mhm.
coming in. Um, for me, I decided pretty early on not to VC. A couple of reasons were when we were quite lucky when we first started developing BIM that had enough initial pilot customers. And we had some good customers that we'd sort of worked with previously through our consultancy that trusted us. So we were able to go, hey, look, we will finish these features, buy it now, and we'll add the rest of this stuff in. So we had a bit of trust on that front. But then the challenges come, I guess, partially is Bimbeats then grew basically larger than me. And so that has that has been a challenge we've been trying to adjust. And at the same time, the consultancy has done very similar things as well. It's growing much larger than I anticipated. So balancing those has been less. Initially, it was just about me running ragged, which is what I did. But what I've definitely done the last few years is starting to have the guys under me,
Mm.
especially in the consultancy, really train up to take a lot of the stuff away and dealing with the customers direct. So probably the biggest skill I gained was a lot of delegation. Um, I don't think you can do that though, really, until you have like six plus people working with you, because you at that smaller size, you really have I guess a mental model of the entire business in your own head, and it's only at that size that you get enough time to spend the time mentoring the guys who can take it on, getting them to run the projects, and then you being able to take a back step. Um, so that's one of those challenges of growth, of getting to that sort of size where you can have the people delegate, I guess, that stuff away. With the bin beats, it was the same thing. Like me and Conrad held, again, we're used to being on it all the time. So we got our first developer in bit over a year ago, full time developer. So he's taken a lot of that stuff. We're now working, like I said, on the marketing and sales to take those other pieces. So the hardest part with delegation, I think, in the consulting space is really getting the guys that you trust that can work with customers. Um, and that you trust to work with those customers as well, and the mentality around that. Because the biggest issue I find is the mentality of the people you're working with. Are they utilization based, especially in consultancy, and focused on like, oh, how much are we charging? What's the variation? We don't have scope for this, and they're all challenges. But I think the bigger mentality you've really got to bring to consultancy is like, what's the customer doing? How do we help them? When you stuff up, own it, things go wrong, how do you work with them so you don't create these negative experiences? And I see that a lot in the AEC building space, to be honest, where the contracts are set up to be very adversarial, and you see the ramifications of that bleed into the management and the project management and how they interface with each other. So I don't know if that's sort of given you some idea, but I definitely found you need that sort of plus that six people at delegation. And then on the startup side, it's totally different because like you're probably experiencing, how do you build a sales pipeline? Do you throw a bunch of money at Google Ads and hope that people trickle in? Do you make the product free and put some sort of monetization wall around it? Like, there's so many ways to do that. I think the way that we've been basically leaning is growing through our trusted network, and we're in quite a privileged spot, where we've spoken at a lot of events and we have a good network reach, that we've now got, and we sort of built that without realizing it at the time. But that only gets you to a point. Beyond that, you really need good old fashioned salespeople. Like, everyone will tell you you don't need that, but to really grow it, you need someone who either has a really good approach to the market, or someone who's just going to get down and grind and just make those calls, do those cold calls, because there's a whole world of people that just don't sit on LinkedIn.
Amazing. Yeah, like I think the both aspect you mentioned about the consultancy, and I also recall in our last interview, you shared the early days of like being in the forums, bad monkey days, where so you have been like building the trust and credibility like since more than a decade, if I to say, and people in the industry knows, okay, your background, the capabilities. And so like for the consultancy, I'm coming from the aspect, okay, uh, like for people like me who are like doing the first gig and quite early, the finding the client is the main bottleneck. uh, for people in your stage, I'm guessing making a scalable way where the leads from the industry are coming in, but how do you effectively build the team could be the major bottleneck.
Yeah. So, and I'm not sure if I'm answering the exact question correctly, but definitely from the early days, I don't, and it's easy to go, oh well, that's when the industry, you were in at the beginning of the industry, or Dynamo or something, so you can sort of piggyback on that, and that works to a degree. But I think a lot of the people that I've met and a lot of the people that I've worked with that end up in this way, they all just started from a point of view of sharing knowledge. So it didn't matter what you learned, you would just share it. You'd go sign up for either your local user group, if there is such a thing, you go share it. And if I think to do any sort of leadership, like front end presence, you really do need to build a network. And the easiest way is to do talks, become, go and just share the knowledge that you know. No one can take your experience, they can only get a glimpse of your knowledge from your talks, if that makes sense. And yeah, occasionally you hear people, oh, if I go and share what I know, they're going to steal it all. And it's like, it doesn't work like that. But sharing what you know just builds a sense of trust with people. But I don't know, I always find it quite rewarding too. So it was never anything done with purpose, but the act of doing that in retrospect, like, I wouldn't have met Havard and the Bad Monkeys without doing that. I wouldn't have met so many people at Autodesk and other people just by sharing everything. You don't. There's no such thing as holding anything back. So you just try and share and learn. And same learning from the other guys as well. Everyone's got so much to share as well. So that's the only thing I can really say from there. And then the only other piece, I guess, the way that we've been, it's like you have to build, but in terms of getting those leaders behind you, and I don't know if you saw Havard. So Havard's from Rio. For those who are familiar, he's a bad monkey, and he started a company called Rio a few years ago, and is now CEO of Anchor. Um, which is another product. But he really created some great ads around like attracting really good talent. What a waste of talent, and being angry at the industry. And when you see the team that responded to that, it was very passionate people. So I think whether or not you build a network or whether you get creative like that, I think there's a lot of people out there in the industry who are just keen to work with passionate people and who have those skills. And then it's just a matter of how can you convince them to join you on your mission. So um, obviously money plays a part, but not everyone has money and no one does at the beginning. So you've got to definitely put some other things on the table rather than just cash if you're trying to build that initial core group. And I definitely have found that if you try and cheap out on your initial hires, it's a recipe for disaster.
Mhm.
Your core team, and I wouldn't even call them hires, your core team that needs to work with you and grow from there, they have to be the best. Like you cannot cheapen out in the early stages by, I don't know, just getting people that maybe don't share the passion or have the expertise.
Nice. Yeah, I recall the ad, and it was so viral and catchy. Like everyone deeply resonate. Yeah, but and it was like, for some reason I think the Bad Monkey core group, and one could trace the like initiatives, and I don't know. I don't know, like gives me like a PayPal mafia type vibes where okay, everyone is doing great stuff after they left and did their own thing.
It's still around. It's interesting. We do get the odd occasional like email come through from random people wanting to learn about Dynamo or something like that. Which I think for the most part, Conrad's still keeping the Archeolab package maintained. I'm pretty sure Andreas is still keeping Clockwork maintained as well. But I'm not 100% sure because I have not done. I've been bad. I haven't updated like my DynaWorks package now in like a year or two. Someone did respond to me. I think his name's Thomas. If you ever watch this, Thomas, apologies because I think I told him like a year ago I'd have it updated in a week and I didn't get around to it. So yeah, like it is interesting how the groups have moved on. But if you actually look at the types of businesses that they've made, they are very similar. It still is in that vein of either a data play or a consultancy type play. But at the same time, you've got guys like I don't know if you know Brian Ringley. He was like a
Yes.
temporary bad monkey for a while. He's now off in Boston Dynamics. Andreas is still in Germany working for an architecture practice. He's quite happy there. Where Julian's gone for Contender as a product manager. So it's not all about like people having to go and start their own thing or anything like that. I think there's a lot of success can be derived from making a difference in existing businesses and internal. I think it is harder in some ways to make a difference inside an existing architectural engineering practice. So there's a lot of kudos that's got to be given to the guys who do continue to push in it because in some ways it is easier to go, oh well, I'll just leave, start my own thing and consult from the outside. And that has a different set of challenges, but it is still really important that there are people in these businesses driving either the innovation or the automation internally as well.
Amazing. Yeah, like and I was about to get into the data play. And I so much remember like the enthusiasm with which you showed like a demo in our last interview. Like there was some AI feature you were developing, and after that the whole Chat GPT LLM
Ah,
era,
it just
right?
exploded.
Yeah. So and it makes me curious. Like you mentioned about Specker, and in Beambeats, you are also dealing with data at a really big scale. What are your thoughts on data aggregation, unstructured to structured data, and like as an industry, like? high level thoughts.
Yeah, I think the challenge is, and it's kind of like the problem that we had with bin beats in the first place was like the premise was if we capture all of this data and throw this really wide net, we will find use cases out of it, right? Um, and there's been, and again, depending on the businesses that some of our BIMBeats customers, they've done some pretty cool things. Some of them have got little chatbots that they're built in for it. Matt Wash, for example, who used to be with BIMBeats and left, he just did a really great talk in Melbourne last week at the Build conference there on how his team is like they're building apps based on where the productivity gaps are and all
Mm.
of that is a really good talk, and it's similar sort of to his AU talks and stuff, but it really is in the lessons learned. They've built some really cool innovative stuff, and they've been able to prove the ROI of those, and then use BIMBeats to capture the app usage as well to prove that these are getting rolled out. How these roll into LLMs is the challenge of back to what is the task that you want these things to do, right? Because I think we're still pretty unclear as an industry what sort of things that we want this stuff to do. So if you look at I guess the architectural simple, but the easy wins are like the Veris, like what's a control net,
Correct.
and these sort of visual
Diffusion.
LLMs.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of conceptual power there in like, okay, let me go whip up 20 concepts based on a napkin sketch or a crappy little sketch in Revit, and I can be super efficient and whipping up 20 or 10 or narrowing down to the three. And then as you probably know much better than me because you're building this stuff, that finessing becomes incredibly challenging. So as soon as you're in an interior design, you're like, oh, can you just make the table slightly less glossy?
Mm.
That's a, oh no, we need to go to Photoshop for that.
Yes.
Or can you move the light source slightly over here and make it red? There's those really big finessing challenges. And when you look at the Photoshops and the way these guys do it, the again, it's like doing a modeling concept, right? You punch through that first 80% really quick. You get the tower, you get the general site right, and then it's all the tweak this, tweak that, and that's where I guess on the visual front. And I'd be keen to hear your thoughts on how you guys have gone with trying to do that.
Yeah, for sure. Like, and that's what, even when we started, I'll just do a brief answer on that. Like, the problem we get to do, no real, like, because me and my co-founder were designers, we know even if we give 90%, and if still they have one feature where they have to mask out, the adoption is gonna be like, we know how difficult the tech adoption among designers is to migrate to a new product. And so after testing, and solved a problem which existing image based generative and so we, like, I don't know if you know the current version. So we take the catalog and do
Hmm.
AI assisted design. So it's all the value add is all our AI assisted designs are purchasable or feasible. So that's a different gameplay rather than just a lot of design variations which
Yep.
you can, but it's like, okay, a kind of multimodal rag approach on the
Yep.
design. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's cool. And that, I guess that makes it easier for the approaches that you're trying to do in terms of making sure that there is a product
Mm,
related, rather than just like inventing some
correct.
essentially mood boards. I would kind of say the current play of the technology is that. So but that's the visual side. Like
Mm,
to your response, I guess around the actual tech side, I don't think as an industry we really know what we want. So like the examples that I'm seeing out there, oh forgive me, I've seen that on LinkedIn. I should give them a shout out. But they got a tool. It's just become out, and they got like some sections on details, and they're
mm,
pointing out. I don't know. On this detail, go to this document for the fire service, or go to this document here, and effectively, it's like you said, it's a bit like a rag service where all it's providing, not in a negative way, but is like a better Googling experience.
correct.
So
So search, yeah.
yeah, yeah. So it is a search thing. It's just connecting patterns to search, but it's not going in and going, hey, this is not compliant to AS or like Australian standard XYZ. this is going to cause a problem with your legal counsel, and you're not going to get this approved, or this product isn't going to work for this area. How do you really need to train like a whole ton of data, and I don't know if you've dumped like drawings and other things into even ChatGPT 4.0, which we're big fans of and we use, but it has very little knowledge around AC technical
Yes.
documentation, and all of that. So we have this huge knowledge gap of these LLMs don't really support what we do, and therefore you kind of need that first step before we can go and figure out all these other pieces. So I think that file searching problem is a great one to solve, and we still need to solve it. But I think the bigger challenge we really have is we still don't have any AEC sort of foundational LLMs that we can use.
Adam, if we make enough money, let's put some data set of like, okay, how do we do chain of thought reasoning on detailing or building process, make a AC language model. That's my like one of the big checklists.
The problem isn't the money's a little bit of a problem. I think the real problem is you really need to go work with one of the really big companies, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So you need to have a partner like Acom or
Mm,
Jacobs, or someone who just has a phenomenal amount of data. Now the problem that you have, and I don't know if you've worked with these companies before, like worked in these companies. So I spent a few years at Acom and worked at a
mhm.
couple of big companies. The way they store data, they have so much data that comes through. They grab it like all these big companies do, depending whether it's defense or not. It has two different gates. Anyway, ultimately it ends up in tape drives buried in vaults
Yes.
or services or whatever. And I had these discussions very early years ago with IT when we wanted to get some archive projects out for some. I can't remember what I was doing, and they're like, just for us to go and retrieve that data is going to cost the business around $20,000 or 25 grand. I can't remember the exact number, because someone from IT's got to like physically go to this data center, figure out where this drive is, extract it, take it back, do a data dump. Then they need to filter through the data dump after dumping it back on a disk to figure out what it is I even need. And then they pass that through, right? So there's this huge, huge problem of, yes, these businesses have the data, but if you are actually to pull apart their business as to how much current data they have, it's probably only 2 years, maybe three, any active projects, so maybe five or whatever. But the rest of it is getting archived pretty quick, because no one can afford the cost of like keeping everything on SharePoint to Microsoft. That costs a phenomenal amount of money. And then you have the issue of the standards of change. So as you get into the nuances, so there is a huge, huge issue of the biggest companies have this data, but even to get access to extract it costs that business all this money. So who's compensating them, right? And then that we're not even touching privacy policies and all the rest of it. So yeah, there's a mountain of challenges for accessing that information. And the amount of data that you need is quite extensive. So if you look at like a smaller consulting engineering company, people, oh, okay, let's pick a company, 300 people, 400 people. They don't do that many projects a year. You
Mm,
are like, in terms of really big projects. So a company that size might do a lot of small things architecture wise, but they might only have 10 maybe big jobs on at any time, right? And they'll run for a couple of years. So when you actually start boiling it down that way, you go, okay, we've got a data set of maybe 20 projects a year of decent, sufficient size, that we can really extract data from. So then it becomes a community problem. And how do we get all this data, and can we anonymize it? And that's, again, just to build a foundational model, and getting back to what questions do we want to ask of it? Is it checking for compliance and those sort of things? So yeah,
the
I've thought a
complex
lot
problem.
about this. um, yeah, it is. It's a really complicated problem, and it is a costly one, because the amount of data is that businesses do have is phenomenal, but it is buried in these systems, and it's hard to convince a company when there's no real ROI. Like, you like, oh well, we want to throw it all into this LLM and see what happens. Um, that's not
Yeah.
a that's not a very convincing story
Yeah.
sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, and actually also want to share one insight, like for this like rag based
Yep.
prototypes or even like wrappers around diffusion. Like it would take maybe a week or two, like I'm sharing from, to build that MVP. But like for that finesse thing which you earlier mentioned, like okay, like the shadows and like the blending took me 2.5 months, or like
Yeah.
even like for make the rag worthy and useful in the enterprise, it's 10x more effort for the last mile usefulness.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. And the problem with RAG, and I really like the idea because obviously, for those who aren't familiar with the term RAG, basically you connect the database to your LLM. So you have a database of all your information about whatever context, and you query that database. It retrieves that specific data, and then your LLM wraps that piece of information or knowledge to give it context. The biggest challenge with RAG I found, and I definitely haven't gone as deep as you have, but we've done a lot with Elastic around it, more experimentation than anything, is your problem in then doesn't become a machine learning problem, LLM problem anymore. It becomes a search problem. So you're now looking at like the standard algorithms of BM25s and clustering and running searches on text embedding, and so your business is no longer about your LLM. You're now like a Google. And just trying to slap the results inside an LLM, if that makes sense. As soon as I said Google, my pixel just fired up. Um, but yeah, and so as yeah, keen to hear what you think. But I found that as soon as you start delving in with rags, you effectively turn into a search algorithm type business, and that becomes your proprietary solution rather than the machine learning model itself.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. I'll also like to share. Like I love nerding out.
Please.
So, for example, let's say there's a construction detail similarity search we want to solve with RAG. So, one way is okay. You upload an image, create a embedding, and then you do cosine similarity of all other details. The
Yep.
challenge is with that is okay, uh, scaling, and it doesn't have other metadata. Where, for example, sometimes it just do the embedding similarity on the style or the major geometry element. But what if I'm interested in MEP details or like some. So there are like also a hybrid search now where okay, what are the, instead of searching in all the details, first you ask the questions or okay, is this particular material, particular style, and only do similarity search in that subsection of all the details in the search space. And so the lot of like deep dives on okay, how do you ensure the search results are closest match, and do you have multimodal model answering first visually using the OCR and other technique. Oh, here's our 10 details and sub uh, categories I found, so first I'll do the subcategory filtering and then do image similarity search, things like that.
Yeah, and that's an interesting one too, because like when you start using these what they call VQA models, visual question answer
Yes.
models, um, it's interesting when you deep dive in there. How is it working? So are you just taking an image and you're kind of slapping some text and trying to include enough like, oh, mechanical detail and this and that and the other. The other one that I've seen that's reasonably effective is combining that with segmentation masking.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so again, for everyone who's not familiar, segmentation masking is effectively when you draw over the top of all the objects with colors and you associate the color with like brick or something like that. So you effectively get this very cartoonish looking drawing, but at a detail level, it's quite cohesive. So then you can do similarity searches with masking, and it's basically grabs all those encodings with the but again, all of these experiments, like they take weeks, and then sometimes, or a lot of times, they lead to dead ends. And again, it's like, is the goal at the end of the day for you just to return the correct detail? And again, that's back to really that searching problem rather than is it guiding you about how to do the detailing? Like, oh, hey, you forgot this note because I noticed you've got a wet area in that same area on the model. Like, how do you bridge those connections so it becomes a little bit more insightful and actionable than just like, oh, here's the detail I think you want? Because then you're just trying to gamify your own library search, if that makes sense. So I think that's the area I'm interested in. It's just a matter of getting the chance to spend time in it, if that makes sense.
That's a great segue to the next question. I was about to ask that. Okay, like I feel a lot of similarity where okay, I, I have to do stuff to run the business, run the consultancy, fine, but sometimes I get more satisfaction doing the tech and coding and solving the actual problem. Do you like how do you get time for doing things more you enjoy in operating?
Um, as the business has gotten a lot bigger, I definitely had to move pretty heavy into operations, especially early on. And then once I delegated, it was a different level of operations. It's more, you get asked to join certain meetings or look at or look at other people's projects, and you're kind of just helping them. The only way I still get to be nerdy basically is I honestly I get my Saturday mornings because my wife likes to sleep in on the Saturday after a busy week at work, and my kids generally like to sleep in. So from about 5 to 8 in the morning is when I do a lot of very very nerdy research and play with things I like. And then on the other front, which is quite good, my son has developed a bit of a passion for game design and gaming. So
Mm.
I've learned Roblox coding and sort of teaching me how to do that, and he's into Blender and stuff. So we kind of share that as a hobby, which is interesting because it exposes me to things like Roblox, things like it, and the Roblox community is like this whole. I could go down a whole tangent on that own. It is such an interesting uh, ecosystem of people in that space as well. So, but it is interesting seeing some of those grow. But that's probably the key ones. And then occasionally, a client will come in with a question, and if it's a really weird question that the software teams like, oh, this is a bit more R&D. The one of the advantages of I guess still being a boss is you do get to pick those things that you're really interested in. You basically can go, well, this is the thing I'm going to hang on to, and all the rest of you can take a hike
Uh,
in a very very nice way. But a lot of it's like R&D, like, hey, we want to connect this to this, and some exploratory around that. So they're kind of the ways I balance it. But the thing that I do have to trade off, and you just do, is it has to be very light touch R&D. Like, I don't have the time to spend 2 weeks going down a rabbit hole coding something to the nth degree. Like, the things that I hand over to the team when they're in the unfortunate position of being handed over something from me is like very, very conceptual. Like, it mostly gets from A to B. There's no error handling. There's no proper constraints on it. It's generally like, I know this will work. Here's the concept of it. If we need a full coding concept, I'll whip something or just point them to some other pieces. But it is very much like grab 10 repos, smash something together to make it
mm,
kind of work if I need to prove the concepts at that level. But most of the problems, outside the non-interesting ones, once you build a few projects and systems for people, like, they are very much like we got some data, or we've got a system we need to automate. There's 3 or 4 different database types. There's a bunch of functions, and ultimately it's just about, you've got some data and you need to update the state of that data. Oh, data, whichever one. So a lot of once you get into it, I guess you get used to which systems, and we stick to the tried and true, especially for enterprise. Like, there's a lot of amazing, cool new tech out there. A lot of new types of databases and all the rest of it. But SQL's been around for a long time. There's a very good reason for that.
mhm,
Microsoft technologies have been around for a long time. There's a very good reason for that. So while I'd be interested in jumping on some, and I do, play around for my own personal knowledge, when you're providing stuff to enterprise, you really do need to stick with, like, this is well supported, this is well vetted. You don't get to take those risks, and you shouldn't on your client's behalf either. Like, they're expecting something to run in production, potentially serve a lot of people. I don't think, get to play with, like, oh, let's go with this awesome startup, and they built some cool tech, and then 6 months later they're didn't make their next round of funding. So
nice, amazing. And we have some great comments from the community. And
hi,
actually,
Jonathan,
I
if you're still
wanted
listening.
Yeah, I got a chance to host him a few weeks ago.
I
Uh,
haven't met him. I did watch that, but yeah, I haven't had a chance to meet yet. We've just been LinkedIn buddies. So
yeah, he is also quite uh, veteran in the space. So Adam, few questions on like
yeah,
building
please.
on Chaitanya's point of building consultancy business. So question one is, okay, once you're finding early clients when you just started out consultant, one might have choices. Okay, should we serve SMBs or large construction firms? And SMB might not have budget. A large company might have longer sales cycles. So just to find one client, would you have to wait a lot. Should you provide discounted rates so you build credential referral? Should you not? Like, how do you make all those decisions?
Um, when it comes to when it's early on, most of my clients I knew through the market. So a lot of it was people, and again, this is this community thing. People that have reached out before on Dynamo or something wanted some sort of script or something like that, or see me at a talk. And again, this is why I find talks quite valuable. But a lot of it is connecting with clients. Now when you're building and so that's how I was in the fortunate position of doing it is essentially I didn't pick SMBs, I didn't pick bigger companies or anything like that. I just sort of reached out to my network and went, I'm doing this now. A few people were aware of it too. So before I actually did the jump, um, from my full time job, I did actually have two offers, like, hey, we want you to build this thing. We know you're full time. So I was in a fortunate position of basically landing on my feet with about 6 months worth of work. And I was like, and again, the interesting thing, and again, I'm just talking from my experience because I'd been a BIM manager and pretty senior at that point in time. It wasn't as much of a risk as it would be for someone, a lot younger, trying something very new and without that sort of 10 or 15 years of experience in the market and all that sort of thing. So I knew at worst case, um, the work would dry up and then I'd just go and put my hand out and see if anyone was interested in my skill set. But from there, we are that helped grow us initially is getting those couple of three trusted customers. Um, I don't I don't do discounts unless they really need it, and that means they're going in on a project or something like that, and we're happy to work with them. But it is all about trust. I don't think it's about the size of the business or the sales cycle. It really is if you've got trusted people that you work with, that they're doing interesting things. Um, you will work with them and make that happen. And then it's just about being available to them and really focused on their solution. And I guess this comes back to my point earlier where these discussions come up about, oh, the billables are this and we need a variation on this and this is going to happen. And those discussions kind of need to be secondary. The first discussion really needs to be like, are we doing what's best for the client?
Mm,
Have we done everything we can? Is the project going well? All of those sort of things, and the transparency is absolutely critical. You need to be transparent. Like if you're gonna sign up with a client and you're gonna be, you're signing up on a number that's going to send you broke in a month, you need to have that conversation with the client and just be like, look, I want to work with you guys. This is going to happen, but at this rate, I will give you, something that I can't ever service or support. So it is being very transparent. I haven't run into even the bigger, even really big companies. There's still people, right? There's still someone that you're working with or that you've reached out to who is interested to work with you. Um, no one's really heartless in this space. And if they are, we've never ended up working with them. So it is still, even with a big company or a medium company, it is still that person to person relationship. So if you can establish those, that's probably more important than anything. And then secondary to that is making that person look good. And what I mean by that is, you know, their trust. They're usually, especially when you're a small business and no one knows of you, they're taking the risk, right? Because again, it's the old, what is it? Yeah, you don't get fired for buying IBM. You don't get fired for going through Autodesk and using the Autodesk people, especially if you're an enterprise customer or something like that. So you really need to make sure that you're helping that person and making life as easy for them, because then they'll champion you and they'll introduce you to other people in the business. And the good thing with big businesses is if you help that person really well, they're going to share that story. If you don't help them very well, they're also going to share that story internally as well. And with the small ones, they just won't keep working with you at that point. So I don't think it matters which one. There's both pluses and minuses. The big value of smaller businesses is your technology can, or your whatever you're doing can usually proliferate a heck of
Mm,
a lot faster. So we built like little scaffolding add-ons for companies of like 5 or 6 Revit technicians, and so all of those guys immediately benefited like a good
and
10 hours of their week back from that automation. So there's huge benefits in that. The really big stuff is a lot harder. And probably the only thing I'd add, which I think I've mentioned a few times, is even with the big projects. So if someone comes to you with some hugely ambitious thing, you've really got to push back on them and go, let's start off small, keep cutting it back to the MVP, because at a certain point, all the features that people want to add are just assumptions. And so you really need to pare it back, just like in startup mentality. You really need, and it's easy to look at the dollar numbers. Oh, we'll take all this money. But I've seen it. We've had to been involved in cleanups with projects where they've just spent so much money and they've had these massive ambitions, and they haven't been focused. And so what they end up with is something that does 150 different features, but all of them about 80%. So it effectively does nothing, right?
mm,
We've seen engineering apps that have been built where someone like built all the engineering calculator, but the exporter from Revit to the engineering software would only export like 5 beams and then it would crash.
oh,
So again, they're focused so much over here that they didn't care about this part. So again, it really is, when you're working with people on, if we're talking software development consultancy, it really is like paring back those expectations, and getting them down to like the one or two or three core features. And sometimes you need some good technology foundations. You need a database, authentication system, all of that type of stuff. But if you can pare them down and get to that point and start sort of helping them through the journey, because especially in AC, everything's treated as a project. Architects, engineers, everything is a project, and therefore they treat these things as projects as well. And so what you've got to sort of give them the vision of is like, okay, let's do this MVP as project number one. Then when
mm,
you guys start getting wins, you'll get mature adoption on the platform, and then you'll know what actual features you need next, and that will be project number two, and then three and four and five and so on. And that's really the key piece, because you try and build something really really big, that takes longer than 6 months, you're really at a risk there. They're not seeing anything. You're adding a lot of features that haven't been used or tested, and it's just like the startup mentality. And in some ways, you got to be just as ruthless, because you've got to like get a little piece that adds value. Then they'll come back to you and tell you what is the next valuable piece. But you've got to be really tough on scope creep, especially at the beginning, because everyone wants everything at the beginning, and you just can't.
man,
So
that's
I
a
don't know if that
heavy dose
helps.
of insight. Loved it. Like I was about to say that we need more such stories of scaffolding plugins where it impacts and people are adopting. Like we don't glorify that those kind of automations as much as
it's
yeah.
it's all the boring stuff. Like we've built tools that just enable like mass permission updates in Autodesk Construction Cloud for really big companies where people have to manually log in and whatever. They are like not sexy. They're not grasshopper and exciting. But when you start talking scale, you're talking about people potentially adding hundreds of new people and removing hundreds of new people to projects every day of a business of significant size. So building automations to make those guys' lives easier is huge. And again, it just frees them up from these really really boring tasks of like adding and removing people to projects. Because you have to be an administrator of these platforms, so you need elevated IT privileges so they don't get handed. So there's a whole bunch of just mundane automation stuff that you can deliver to customers instead of just the glorified really cool stuff at AU or whatever place you're showing. Um, but it doesn't provide a fraction of the value that, say, automating some of these mundane business and data handling tasks do. Um, and we've had great success there. We had one where we were just we got a whole heap of engineering drawings, and we ended up passing through Microsoft's Visual Studio AI tool, and again
Hmm.
just extracting the basic data so that they didn't have to enter it out separately. There was very little work. It took a couple of days for our team to put that together, but the impact was like save two engineers for 12 weeks in terms of time savings. So you're talking 800 hours of savings for 3 days. So again, look for the mundane. The sexy stuff's great, but typically the sexy stuff happens in isolation. Like the fancy facade tower is driven by the architect and a computational designer. It's not spanning across these silos. So yeah, automate the mundane stuff. It's not cool, but it adds the most value.
I see. Uh, I wanna like learn from you like this thing, which like during proposal or like offering, like in the space of data to insights, like there's a lot of unstructured data. Step one is structured data. Step two is insight, and people want to know productivity gains or ROI. But for that insight to work, there's a lot of like foundation to be established, systems into place in this firm. So in
Oh, did I
the
lose you or did you lose me?
is an egg, you don't have. I think I lost the connection.
Sorry, I
Can you
think
hear
you
me?
did, but I think we're back. I can hear you now. Can you hear
Yeah,
me?
sorry.
Okay,
Yep,
sorry.
all
Repeat
good.
the question.
Uh, yeah, I just uh, oops. Okay. All right, we'll make it work. Uh, so the
It's okay.
the point the question was, when you're offering an automation which has an ROI, but you don't have a proven track record, or you're validating the hypothesis that okay, this much gain. How do you uh, create that offering in such a way that okay, it's gonna drive business value? We just don't know the number yet, but we have to set up a lot of foundations in place for that automation.
Yeah. So typically, I found if it's a very obvious win, you don't need a number
Mm,
because the team will let you know, right? So a really obvious win, like I was talking about with that tool with that added and removed users. I know that there was a team of like three people who like probably 30% of their day was adding and removing users. So that came from a very clear complaint. So it's quite easy to do the numbers there, right? So they're the jobs that you want to try and focus on if you can, because it's like the scaffolding tool. It's like we knew that the guys would take 2 days to do a tender, and on these type of topologies, by doing this thing, we could bring that down to like half a day. So they're the really easy wins. The harder ones are when I typically find you're not as clear on the
mm,
automation's value that you're providing. It gets murky, and sometimes that's when it comes back into an R&D problem, right? So I guess it's being careful of when things are an R&D problem and when things are a we need you to build X so we can do Y. And that's where I guess with R&D, and especially we've done this before, when we start to detect it's a very R&D problem, we will move it back to more just hourly consulting, and we'll be very clear. Like, we're not 100% sure of the value. We think this will work. We think it's going to look like this. But at some point, that will become clear, and that's when it can turn into a normal project. Is when you can do that. When you're starting to talk about specific numbers, I typically, again, I think that's when the value of the technology probably isn't as clear. And Carl Storm said he again had built recently, and I think he's done it a few times. He's got a really good, very simple metric that's like, amount of time it's going to be being used by how many people it's going to be being used by. Um, and typically that's a scale problem. So what I mean by that is like the bigger the business, If you got 500 engineers, you're going to have a much bigger impact if the tool, I don't know, does like auto correcting of, I don't know, so an engineering design versus like 20 engineers. So it is looking at those productivity pieces too. If you're building a very siloed piece of technology versus say, I don't know, automating employee onboarding. So it automatically adds you to all these systems automatically. That could affect every single employee in the business. So there's bigger value there. But I would say if the business you're working with is really not clear on the ROI and you're having trouble just struggling to understand what the ROI is, it's probably going back to look at the problem and really going, do we have the right solution for the problem? Because if that part is spot on, it should be clear between both parties.
Interesting. Mate, I have 20 more questions which I want to discuss, but in respect of time, I'll ask this last question and maybe you could keep it brief so we
Yeah,
can
yeah, I can do
end.
that.
Yeah. So, for your journey in general, or maybe in running the product or running the consultancy, are there any lessons you learned the hard way?
Oh, heaps. To keep it short, yeah, the biggest lesson I've learned is when you're trying to estimate how long something will take, you will never ever figure that out. And
Mm,
this is the same in construction as well, right? Like people think these are quantifiable things. At the end of the day, projects will go wrong. You will be over budget. You will have underscoped. You will have a very demanding client. All of these things, and the only skill I can say is just acknowledging that up front, and therefore not spending 5 weeks working on a proposal. Because you got to think every hour that you're putting into a proposal to try and quantify the risk is an hour that you should have effectively charged for that project or need to get back somehow. So I would just keep it as simple as you cannot be perfect with your guesses. Experience helps you get a little better. There will always be unforeseen circumstances, and so making sure you've either got that buffer in these systems from the get-go and having that transparent relationship with the client. And then lastly, being very clear on scope. And what I mean by that is it is okay to give the client extra scope if there's budget, but make sure they know that and make sure it's documented. Because if you
mm,
don't set that standard, it's the old adage of give an inch and they'll take a mile, and people don't maliciously do that. But if they start making requests and you're starting to do them all for free, and you're not acknowledging that, um, the problem is you'll then run out of scope to actually finish the job, and they get cranky because you haven't solved the main thing. So I would just premise that by it's okay to give stuff and go beyond, and we should all be doing that, especially if there's extra budget for it. But be very clear that this is an extra thing that you gave them, and I mean that like putting it potentially in invoices as a line item, like free extra service of X and stuff. Because if you ever need to call back or you have a problem where the project has been in the future, there's very well documented evidence that you provided all this stuff for free, and so it's an easier conversation to have. Otherwise, it's just a he said, she said. So feel free to go overboard, but just keep it clear, and just be willing to be transparent on everything. You will get things wrong, they will get things wrong, and just being open with those discussions, I guess, when you're preparing a proposal, and you'll never get it perfect.
amazing. It's a great piece of advice to end the podcast. And as usual, I had a amazing time hosting you. Looking forward to the next things you're building, and I always follow your updates. So, looking
Thank
forward
you.
to.
You too. I'm keen to see where you guys are taking it because I did play with the product probably 3 months ago. Every probably 3 months, I like, I got to log in and see where it's at now. So keep plugging away, mate. It's great to see.